For the next hour, you'll be leaving the show me state and entering the show me the money state. So stop what you're doing, grab a pen, and get ready to learn. Jake Floyd of Floyd Financial Group will be your guide for straight talk and honest answers about living the life you deserve in retirement. So prepare to be empowered. Now, here are your Show Me the Money hosts, Jake Floyd and Jeff Shade.
Good morning. Thank you so much. Welcome to Show Me the Money, the radio show that gives you the straight talk and honest answers you need to help you reach your wealth management and retirement goals through smart investing and careful planning. On today's show, we're going to be talking about 7 crucial retirement mistakes and how to avoid them. Also, early retirement withdrawal strategies for the long haul. We'll talk about the Take That Uncle Sam rule of retirement spending. Then finally, the best places to retire right here in the Ozarks. My name's Jeff Shade. As always, I'm just here to ask the questions, but the words of wisdom and solid advice, they come from Jake Floyd, Floyd Financial Group. Hey, Jake, how you doing this morning?
I'm doing great, Jeff. Thanks for asking.
Certainly welcome, my friend. I hope everybody else having a great weekend here in the Ozarks. We certainly do appreciate you listening each and every week to Show Me the Money. Jake, most people don't fail in retirement because of one big mistake. It's death by 1,000 bad decisions. So today I wanted to break down 7 of the biggest retirement mistakes that could cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars. Before we get to the list, Jake, why do so many people get retirement wrong?
I think it's just a big mind shift for people. I think people have a little bit unrealistic expectations of what their portfolio has made to the point of retirement, what they expect it to make in retirement, and what they can take out as a result. So I think if people get it wrong, and honestly, Jeff, I don't find that a lot of people are just doing it wrong. There's degrees of wrong, right? There's things that hurt you a little bit that don't really affect you over the long haul, but then there's things that end your retirement and you got to go be a Walmart greeter, right?
Right.
Those are much bigger problems. But I think most people have never really looked at their portfolio. They don't really understand what they have, and therefore they don't know how it will be affected in different types of environments and once they start to pull income. So I think just really looking at it, evaluating it, and having a plan is probably the number one thing people don't do. I talk to lots of people that are like, hey, I'm going to retire next month. I said, great. How much do you got in your 401k right now? I don't know. And so I said, well, let's pull it up and let's look at it. But like, how can you possibly expect to hit those numbers if you haven't looked at it? And again, I'm not picking on anybody. I'm just saying there's a lot of people that have been successful even though they have not really been paying attention. Some cases because they have not been paying attention, all the emotions taken out of it. They just have the money deducted from their check and they've been the beneficiary of 40 or 50x growth since the early 80s. But when you get to retirement, you got to start having a plan because you can't afford to take those big hits anymore.
Jake, when people come to you, do they have an idea of how much money that they actually do have, or are they finding out for the first time? What's the big question usually in the first meeting?
Yeah, so I think people generally know what they have. I'd say probably about 30% of people don't really know what they have, and 70% of people have a pretty good idea. But I think the big question everybody's asking is, how do I take this pile of money and turn it into money I can live on each month? Not only how much can I take, but how do you physically, or how do you actually get it from this 401k into your bank account to spend each month? I think that's probably the number one question I get asked. And a close number 2 would be, when should I take Social Security?
So let's talk about Social Security. What is mistake number 1? Would it be taking it too early?
Honestly, Jeff, I don't know. Most of the people that I see have not really made that decision, and they're pretty good to listen to my advice. I don't know that really taking it too early is a thing unless you're not retired. If you're not retired, you don't want to have to pay back Social Security, and certainly don't want to pay it back and not get the roll up. But I think that if you're actually retired, I'm actually a pretty big proponent of turning on Social Security. I'm a bird in the hand's worth two in the bush kind of guy. And I would rather you save your money in your portfolio so that it benefits you and so that you have as many options as you can have as you go through retirement versus spending your money down and waiting for Social Security to get bigger, which who knows what Congress is going to do with that over the next 5 or 6 years. Again, we've talked many times on this show. I do not think that Social Security is going away, but I do think it will be modified in some way because they have to do something, because it's going to go totally, the Social Security fund goes to zero in 2033. So It'll be just like Congress and politicians to wait till 2032 to address this problem. I'm a little bit of a fan of taking what we can while we can, more than waiting around and hoping that Congress will do the right thing for the people. Because let's be honest, Congress generally does what's best for who? Congress.
Exactly. Do people ever use the theory that I'm going to take it at 62? I don't need the money, but I'm going to take it at 62 and invest that money as opposed to waiting until 70 because I think I can make more than Social Security is going to benefit me. I mean, you get a raise, what is it, 8% per year, 62 on, something like that. Is it a good strategy to take it early to invest the money if you don't need it?
So the answer to that question is absolutely. And if you're even asking the question of whether you should turn it on at 62 or 67, that implies that you could wait till 67, because there's a lot of people that can't retire without Social Security. But assuming that you could wait, if we look at break-even analysis of taking Social Security at 62 versus 67, you're something like 78 years old before you get even, meaning those 5 years of payments, by the time the bigger payment catches up, to total money taken, you're 78. But that assumes a 0% rate of return. Now, I'm not guaranteed to be alive at 78, let alone later than that. But let's assume for a minute that you're even going to live to 85 or 90. If you take that money at 62 and you invest it even at like 5% compound, because the benefits you get on Social Security is a simple interest calculation, not a compound interest. So let's say we just begin taking that money and we take it and we put it on 5% interest. You got to be something like 94 or 95 to get even if you do that. So again, Social Security used to be really complicated. There used to be like 1.1 million different ways to file for Social Security, file and restrict, file and suspend, all that kind of thing. A lot of that got cleared up with the Secure Act. So I think the calculation is much simpler, but it's definitely something we spend time talking about when people come in for their consultation.
Talking with Jake Floyd, Floyd Financial Group, and we're talking about 7 crucial retirement mistakes and how to avoid them. Our phone number, 417-889-7233. If you'd like to come in and sit down and talk with Jake about your retirement journey, no cost, no obligation, no judgment, 417-889-7233. We would love to help you out. Jake, earlier you talked about another concern that people have is their paycheck. How are they going to get a paycheck? When they're working, they got paid every week or every 2 weeks, once a month. How does it work when you're retired? How do you actually get your hands on your money?
Yeah, so it kind of depends a little bit on each case-by-case basis. If you have a pension, there's some paperwork generally that you do to get that turned on. Whether it makes sense to take a pension buyout or if your pension even offers a buyout is another consideration that we want to look at. So once you fill out that paperwork, they generally do a direct deposit of your pension. Social Security works similarly to that, where they force a direct deposit of Social Security. So it kind of shows up just like a paycheck, like when you've been working. When it comes to your investments, and we move investments out of a 401k or other investments, we generally set up a link to your bank account. And what we do from there is we set up a monthly income based on how many dollars you have and the conversation that we have. We go ahead and hold out taxes beforehand, depending on how many dollars we're holding out of your pension or Social Security, and we'll analyze that. So federal and state taxes, so that you don't have to worry about making quarterly payments because of that. Then you kind of sail off into the sunset, right? And that just shows up every month like a paycheck, and you're not needing to worry about it. And I think a lot of people are concerned that they're like, hey, how do I make sure I get my paycheck each month? It's really just as dependable as the paycheck you get now.
So, Jake, let's continue with our topic here, retirement mistakes that people are making. We talked about Social Security taking it at the wrong time. What about borrowing from retirement accounts like 401k loans? It's sort of a double-edged sword, isn't it?
Yeah, it kind of depends on where you're at in your journey. I think there are good times to borrow from your 401k as opposed to using a credit card or as opposed to using a HELOC. There are some reasons to do it. When you pay the interest back, it goes into your account, not to a third party. But I do think we want to be careful taking loans too close to retirement, because it can eat into how many dollars you have saved up and therefore your income. But that's why it's nice to have somebody to talk to, like a financial advisor, and you say, hey, I got this purchase I want to make. What's the best way to do this? And we can have a conversation about it versus you kind of hoping you're making the right decision. And then we find out later, oh, man, we shouldn't have done that. We should have done this over here. Or even worse, a lot of people don't borrow and they just take money out when they're 55 and they get hit with penalties and taxes and Maybe depending on their job and everything, they might even be on Obamacare, and then it affects their Obamacare premium. And so there's a lot of things to consider. But I do like the loans from 401ks as opposed to other instruments, but we want to be careful about doing that too close to retirement.
Jake, the next one surprises people, and that is pulling money too early. Just because you can retire at 59 and a half doesn't mean that you should. Can you comment on that, taking money too early?
Yeah, it's really a function of how much you have saved versus how much you're spending. And if you have saved a lot of money, there's a lot of people that retire earlier than that even. I have a couple of people that retired at 51 and 52, and they had a ton of money saved up, and they didn't really need that much to live on, and so they went ahead and pulled the trigger. But I have people that are 69 and really still don't have enough money to retire to replace their income. So it's really about how frugally you live your life. And I assume that a lot of our listeners are pretty frugal. Conservative people tend to be more frugal. And I'm sure I have a lot of listeners right here that are nodding their heads and saying, we don't buy brand new pickup trucks, and we don't buy stuff at Dillard's. We could buy at Goodwill and that kind of thing. And if that's you, you may be shocked how little income you actually need in retirement, because once you're done working, there's a lot of taxes and things that you don't pay. The only way to really know for sure is just to analyze the situation. Say, okay, here's how many dollars I have for retirement. Here's how much I get when I am old enough for Social Security. Here's how much I can take off my investments. And then figure out whether that's really enough or not. And that's really the primary thing that I do in meetings with people, is really just look at this situation as a whole and help them make the right decision as far as when to retire, how many dollars to pull, and all that kind of thing.
And Jake, this next one might ruffle a few feathers with some competitors out there. It's about working with the wrong advisor. Now, not all advisors are fiduciaries, are they?
No, not all advisors are fiduciaries. I will say that many of them are becoming fiduciaries. We were fiduciaries before it was cool. Let me just say that.
Okay.
Just kidding. But yes, I do think that's generally a good thing in the industry, that people are held to a higher standard. I have an enormous amount of effect that I can have on somebody's portfolio, and I should be held accountable for that. Other advisors should be held accountable for that. I do think there's a lot more people operating as a fiduciary now than there ever has been. I would say it's probably 60 or 70% of the people in this area are technically at least supposed to be operating as a fiduciary. But there are some people that still operate on a suitability-only standard.
And what we mean by fiduciary is that legally and, of course, morally, you need to put your client's interest ahead of yours. You're not going to put your client into something that only benefits you. It has to benefit them. And certainly here, as you said, at Floyd Financial Group, we've been fiduciaries before being fiduciary was really cool. All right, let's tie it all up with this last one, mistake number 7, and that's trying DIY retirement. Why is that a big mistake?
Doing DIY, if you've ever done a project at home, you're like, hey, I'm going to do this myself. It's not a job fixing up your house when you're already a carpenter, right? You're doing something that you're never done before, not comfortable with. You probably know that and have learned the hard way that DIY projects can be difficult and you can get adverse results. Retirement is way too important to experiment with. And if you make some wrong decisions, there's some decisions that there's no coming back from. And it's important to have somebody that has helped hundreds, if not thousands of people retire so that they can help you avoid the potholes that they have learned the hard way along the way. And you're not just falling prey to either an inexperienced advisor or no advisor, and you're having to learn the hard way on retirement, which can end up in you having to unretire. So it's good to have experience in your corner.
Jake, great conversation here. I think that most people don't realize that they've made these mistakes until it's too late. So if you're within 5 to 10 years of retirement or you're already retired, this is where people lose the most money. Floyd Financial Group will sit down with you. We'll take a look at your Social Security, your taxes, your income plan, and show you where you could be making some costly mistakes. This is a no-cost, no-obligation retirement review. You can get yours today by calling 417-889-7233, 417-889-7233. Leave your name, telephone number. Ashley will call you back and set up that appointment. Again, there's no cost, there is no obligation, and no judgment. We'll meet you where you are. Because the difference between a good retirement and running out of money, well, it comes down to the decisions that you make right now. Once again, 417-889-7233. We're also online at FloydFinancialGroup.com. Jake, time for a break. When we come back here on Show Me the Money, we'll be talking about early retirement withdrawal strategies for the long haul when our program continues here on 104.1 KSGF, where Springfield comes to talk.
Ready for another helping of some more real money talk? Thought so. Now, here's another serving of Show Me the Money with your hosts, Jake Floyd and Jeff Shea.
Welcome back to Show Me the Money. I'm Jake Floyd. In this segment, we're going to be talking about early withdrawal strategies for the long haul.
And Jake, a lot of people think the hard part is saving enough to retire early. But what if I told you the most dangerous part comes after you retire? It's just like mountain climbing. Most accidents happen on the way down. So Jake, people dream about early retirement, but what's the biggest mistake that they make once they reach the pinnacle of the retirement mountain?
Yeah, I think that a lot of people have this sense of finality, like, hey, I've put my time in, I'm done, I made it. And I think that retirement is a process and something that you live through, not something that happens one time and then you're just done with it forever. And I think some people look at it as long as I can get to retirement, I'm good. But you also have to survive retirement. You have to make sure your money's invested right. You have to make sure you're not spending too much, that you don't have too many health issues come up, that your kids don't suck you dry. There's a lot of different things to think about, and being done at 65 is definitely not how it works.
Jake, let's talk about accessing money early before 59 and a half. Now, that's where people get burned, right?
This is definitely one of the places that you can definitely get burned, especially depending on how early you retire. Now, there are several ways to get money out of retirement plans without there being large penalties and fees and things like that. But they all come with their own caveats. I mean, the first one is you can just pull the money out and pay a 10% penalty. That's probably the least advisable, but there are situations where it can make sense to do some of that as opposed to some of these other ideas. So another one is 72T, which is for the IRS code, but basically it says if we take substantially equal periodic payments, you take the same payment each year until you're 59 and a half or for 5 years, whichever is longer. And so you have to commit ahead of time to take those payments, and then they let you out of the 10% penalty. You still have to pay tax, but no penalty. There's a rule of 55, which means if you have a 401k and you retire after 55, that's very important. Not take the money out after 55, but retire after 55. Then that money, you can also take money out of the 401k before 59 and a half with no penalty. Now, if you roll that out to an IRA, you no longer can do that. So there's a lot of caveats here. You can also potentially convert to a Roth, wait for 5 years, leave the money there, and then you can take out the contributions tax-free, but not the growth. So there's a few caveats there. If you're really wanting to retire early, that's definitely a situation where we should sit down and talk, because there's a lot of things you have to put in place ahead of time. And so the sooner we meet about it, the better.
Jake, are you having more people who come into the office and maybe they're not traditional retirees? They're not 65 to 70 years of age. Are you seeing people who want to retire earlier?
I think there's a lot of people that want to never work, Jeff. And so I think
that's a problem right there.
I think that's part of it is like, if you want to retire at 35, do you really ever start?
Right.
I think there's a lot of people listening to this show that realize that work is not, it is a 4-letter word, but it's not a 4-letter word in that sense of things, right?
Right.
It's not an awful thing to have to go to work necessarily. Now, if you hate your job, then maybe you should consider a different career path and all that. But for the most part, I think a lot of people listening to this show, they work at the same place 20, 30, 40 years, and they're used to working. They're not afraid of working, but you hit a point at some point where you're ready to retire. As far as how many people want to retire early, I think there's more people that want to retire at 60 and 62, but I don't have too many people that are coming to me at 45 or 50 saying, hey, I'm ready to retire.
So the average age that people want to retire between 62 and 65, as you said, for some people, work is a 4-letter word, but maybe people want to retire from the job that they've had because they don't necessarily like it, but they'd go into a second career. So this is where this conversation could apply to them. Talking with Jake Floyd, Floyd Financial Group, we're talking about this FIRE movement, which is financial independence, retire early, and what's involved with maybe pulling the plug before the average person does. Let's talk about the 4% rule, Jake. Does that still work for early retirees?
4% could be a little aggressive for people who are retiring really early, 45 or 50. The 4% rule is just kind of a guideline. It's going to depend more on how you're invested and how flexible you are with your income and that kind of thing, whether the 4% rule is appropriate. In some cases, if you're not retiring early, we can go even 5% or 5.5%, depending on how the situation's set up. But 4%, if you're retiring at 50, we need to count on your money lasting like 40 years. So I think discretion is the better part of valor there.
Jake, when I think about retiring early, I think the first thing that comes to mind if I retire before the age of 65, when I get Medicare, that health insurance is going to be a big problem. How do we address that?
Health insurance is a massive problem. The Affordable Care Act is like so many other acts where the bill is named the opposite of what it is, right? So the Affordable Care Act made healthcare totally unaffordable. Or the Inflation Reduction Act caused a lot of inflation. Or the Patriot Act, which you're supposed to be for if you're a patriot, allows the government to spy on everything you do everywhere all the time. So, okay, I'm going to get off my soapbox now. So when it comes to healthcare costs, there is several things to consider. Number one, if you're going to retire before 65, before your Medicare age, you need to have some kind of plan for how you're going to get health insurance, because most people get it through their work in today's world. There's a lot of people from age 60 to 65 that would retire tomorrow if their health insurance premium wasn't going to be $1,000 or $1,500 a month. I have a couple right now that's paying $2,700 a month on the Affordable Care Act.
Wow.
So you need to have a plan for how that's going to work and how you're going to pay that bill or how you're going to reduce that bill. Or if you have a spouse that you can go on their insurance, that's potentially an option. Or if you're a veteran, there's other options. But health insurance is probably one of the biggest things that keeps people from retiring because the cost is so astronomical. There's a lot of people paying $200 a month or something to their employer at age 65, and they're like, well, it's not too much money. Yeah, but what they don't realize is their employer's paying $2,000 a month for a couple on their behalf. So understanding health insurance, if you have to go on the Affordable Care Act, understanding how your income will affect your premium, because how much you pay each month is determined by how much you make. And if you make a decent sum of money, you can be paying well over $1,000 a month for health insurance. If you make very little money, then you could potentially even get it free, depending on what plan you go for. So talking to somebody about that is very important. I have some people I can point you to. I do not do health insurance here personally, but I have some people that I trust that can help with any questions that we have there. But yeah, health insurance is a big one.
And Jake, when we're talking about retiring early, as you said, we're not necessarily talking about 35, 40. There are some people who do try that, but we're primarily talking about before the age of 65. Now, we know that people are living longer than ever today. Longevity risk is really something that comes into play in this conversation, isn't it? Because if you retire at 60, you might have 35 years of retirement to plan for. How does that change your retirement planning strategy?
That's really true. We need to make sure that we understand the implications of how much money we're spending. If you're going to be retired 30 or 35 years, you're also going to have almost certainly a couple of major market downturns in that period. And so throwing it all in the stock market and hoping for the best is probably not a plan, probably not a strategy. It's something you might get away with, but do you really want to risk that with retirement? Hopefully, retirement's something you do only one time. We don't want to get it wrong, and we don't want to pull the trigger on retirement at 50, and then you have to go back to work at 65 because you ran out of money.
So, Jake, let's talk about what a sustainable portfolio really looks like if you're retiring early. What are some of the major components of that, or some of the things that we need to put right at the top of the list?
Yeah, we need to make sure that we're diversified. Not only diversified within the stock market, but diversified in strategy, potentially in financial product too. We don't want to only have our money in stocks, because if stocks go down, then we have nothing to buoy us while we're retired. So we want to make sure that we have well-diversified portfolio, whether we're owning some bonds, annuities, or some other kind of asset class that helps us weather the storms in the market, because we can't afford to really ever hit a 40 or 50% negative when we're retired, because you'll never be able to get back to even. We don't want to assume anything. We don't want to assume that the stock market's just always going to go up, or assume that Bonds are always going to protect us when the stock market goes down. There's a lot of times we can point to, but even most recently in 2022, when the market was down, I think the S&P was down 19.2%. The bond market was actually down 20%. It was actually down more than the stock market. A lot of people don't realize that. We need to watch our costs, how much outgo we have. When we get to retirement, it's really more about cash flow than it is about how much total income you have. The income versus outgo situation. And in retirement, all things equal, it's better to reduce your outgo than it is to increase your income because you pay less taxes too. So if we have like a vehicle we want to try to pay off, or a house we want to try to finish paying off, or credit card debt, that kind of thing, we want to get rid of that because that reduces your outgo and therefore reduces your need for more income, allows you to pull less, allows you to pay less taxes. So when you're living off your money, every mistake is magnified.
So, Jake, once again, let's circle back around here. Bottom line, can people retire early and do this on their own successfully?
Yes, they can. I would say, though, that probably 90% of people don't have the discipline to do it. There's a few factors that make it very difficult for somebody to do it on their own successfully. Number one, most people don't have enough money or have barely enough money, and therefore they don't have room to make mistakes. That's probably the biggest one. Most people also do not want to become a financial advisor or a financial expert in retirement if they have been an electrician all their lives or whatever it is that you have chosen to do. I wouldn't have the first idea how to do your job. Could I figure out how to wire a house with enough time on YouTube? And
yeah,
probably, yeah. Does that mean I could do your job as well as you do it? Of course not. That's lunacy to think that. So I push the accelerator in my car and the car goes forward. And that's about what I know about my car, right? So I don't pretend to know how to do everybody else's job, but to think that you can come in a month and learn how to do financial planning and make sure that you don't make a lot of rookie mistakes is probably unrealistic. But for the few that have the discipline and have the time, and then the last one is probably emotion. When the market has a month like last April, let's say, where the market was down 20%, and let's say you had $1 million and now you're down to $790,000. That is incredibly emotional if it's your money. Having an advisor to manage it for you can really help take the emotion out of it, because the right thing to do in that environment was to be buying with both hands. It's very hard when it's your money and you know you're down as much as you are to go in deeper. Even if technically it's the right decision, money gets very emotional. So first of all, we need to have a plan that doesn't allow you to lose 21% in a month. But if you were in that plan and you were in the market, making sure that you can make the decisions, the hard decisions, without emotion is probably the last big thing that would make it hard for somebody to do in retirement if they don't have prior experience.
Well, Jake, I think the takeaway here is that early retirement sounds like freedom, but without the right withdrawal strategy, it really can turn into financial quicksand. And we've seen people retire early and then 10 years later, they realize they're running out of money. So if you're thinking about retiring early or you've already retired early, you need to know if your plan will actually last as long as you do. Floyd Financial Group will stress test your income, your taxes, your withdrawal strategy. It's a no-cost, no obligation, no judgment retirement review. To get yours, call 417-889-7233. It's 417-889-7233, because the biggest risk in retirement isn't the market, it's making the wrong moves and not realizing it until it's too late. Once again, 417-889-7233. We're also online at floydfinancialgroup.com. Jake, time for break. When we come back here on Show Me the Money, we're going to be talking about the Take That Uncle Sam rule of retirement spending when our program continues here on 104.1 FM KSGF, where Springfield comes to talk.
We're back with your financial catch of the day, and it's a big one. Here's more Show Me the Money Radio with your hosts, Jake Floyd and Jeff Shea.
Welcome back to Show Me the Money. I'm Jake Floyd. In this segment, we're going to be talking about the Take That Uncle Sam rule of retirement spending.
And Jake, you've spent your whole life saving for retirement, but what if I told you the government might end up being your biggest beneficiary? Well, today we're talking about how to legally keep more of your money and give less to Uncle Sam. So, Jake, people think that taxes go down in retirement. Is that actually true?
So I would say the average person in this area probably does save a little bit in taxes, especially if we're talking about all types of taxes in retirement. So the first one is when you retire, you stop paying Social Security tax. That's pretty big. So your payroll at work, you usually hold out Social Security tax, but once you're retired, you don't do that anymore. Generally speaking, most people have a little bit less gross income in retirement, not necessarily net income, but gross income, which also saves a little bit of taxes. But there are also lots of ways to get hit with a tax bomb if you're not careful. And if you're a higher income person and you're taking a lot of money out of your retirement plans, your taxes can even go up in retirement. So it's important to keep a finger on that.
And Jake, I don't think that a lot of people realize that Social Security is actually taxed. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I would say 60 or 70% of people probably believe that Social Security does not get taxed. It definitely does get taxed unless you're quite low income. So I was actually talking to somebody about this yesterday. So if your adjusted gross income plus half of your Social Security benefit is less than $32,000, then you do not get taxed on Social Security. If it's between $32,000 and $44,000, then you get taxed at 50%. If it's over $44,000, then you get taxed at 85%. This is as a couple married filing jointly, so the numbers are different for a single. But it definitely can get taxed. However, the big beautiful bill that got passed last year does handle quite a bit of that by adding an extra deduction on top of your normal standard deduction. And for a lot of people, that will decrease their income to such that they will not pay tax on Social Security. I would say that probably affected half of people. So there's a lot of people that ended up getting a big refund they weren't expecting this year, and a lot of it's due to that.
So, Jake, let's break down the biggest threats that retirees face in terms of taxes. Ordinary income tax.
Right. So ordinary income tax, when you take money out of a 401k IRA, you pay ordinary income tax on that. So it's just like pay that you received at work. There's no special tax treatment. It's not capital gains. It's going to be treated as ordinary income. And so as you take money out, let's say you decide to take money out of your 401k to buy a car or something like that, and you spend $40,000. Well, that stacks on top of your other income for that year, and that can be a factor. And so then we have to worry about, like we talked about last segment, the Affordable Care Act. If you've retired early and you're on Obamacare, that can push your income up, and then you'll get penalized and have to pay more for your health insurance. With IRMA, you have to watch out too. So if you're on Medicare and you earn, I believe the threshold this year is $212,000 as a married couple. If you have more income than that, then you start getting charged more for your Medicare Part B. So a lot of people are like, I don't make $212,000. Well, that includes any capital gains that year. That includes all your income, any IRA distributions. So like if you sold a piece of property, that can be something that gets you up there real quick and in a hurry. So you may not think you have a problem with it, but there's a lot of people that end up with a problem with IRMA. And then you have to think about RMDs. Once you get to 73 years old, if you're not already taking RMDs, when you get to 73, you'll have to start taking them. And that's forced distributions from IRAs and 401ks and qualified plans. And then that stacks on top of your income too. So there are a lot of ways that taxes can come bite you in retirement, but if we plan ahead for them, we can avoid a lot of them.
All right, Jake, so what is this Take That Uncle Sam rule?
Yeah, so it's about controlling when and where you withdraw your money. So if we're careful, we can minimize how many dollars that Uncle Sam gets. And I imagine that the people listening to this show, I know I have a lot of farmers, I have a lot of blue collar workers, a lot of people that just really hate giving their money to the government, especially when they see how the government spends it. And I am one of them, by the way. Nothing burns me more than having to write a big tax check to the government.
Oh, yeah.
And so if we are careful with how we do things, we're not talking about tax evasion. That's illegal. We're talking about tax avoidance, where we use the law to our benefit. We simply just want to minimize as much taxes as we can, because that's just money that stays in your pocket. It allows you to take more income for longer and that kind of thing. So over your lifetime, we want to pay as little tax as possible. And so when we're saying, take that, Uncle Sam, we're just saying, hey, you have used the tax code to tax me my whole life. Now I'm going to use it to minimize my taxation as much as I can. And so where we take money from and how often and at what point in life we take money from will affect this. And the order that we take it in can matter more than you think.
And Jake, you made a good point. The tax code is as voluminous as it is because it is presenting all sorts of tax opportunities that you didn't know existed. And here at Floyd Financial Group, of course, taxes is one of the big things that we try to work with our clients on to make sure that you're not paying more than you have to. Let's say that someone wants to spend more early into retirement, travel, enjoy life. Jake, what should they be doing as it relates to taxes?
Yeah, so I think that when we're retiring early or retiring prior to 65 specifically, if we have Roth IRA money or after-tax money, CDs, or even like brokerage accounts that are not retirement accounts, we can spend that money without it being counted as income for health insurance purposes and for tax purposes for that matter. And so if we're careful about how we do that earlier in retirement, we can avoid getting penalized by the Affordable Care Act or IRMA. So again, and I know I say this probably 100 times a show, so I apologize, but I'm going to say it one more time. If we plan all this out ahead of time, and you come in here to me a year or two before you're ready to retire or even more, I have a lot of people that come in and say, hey, I'm going to retire in 3 weeks. And so there's limited things that I can do plan-wise there. There's still things we can do, but that limits what some of the options that we have. But if you come in ahead of time and we can say, okay, you're going to retire on this day, that means you got to have 3 years and 3 months to get you to Medicare age. And so what's the best way to spend that money to keep your income on paper as low as possible to get your health insurance paid for as little as possible? And we can kind of reverse engineer all that math. But if you come in and you say, hey, I retired last week and I need to get some income, then we're going to be a little bit more hamstrung. But really thinking about which money we spend and when we spend it can be a big deal. But we also have to consider, what are your goals with this money? So far, a lot of the things we've been talking about are people that are trying to squeeze as much income out of their money as possible. And I do have a lot of those people, but there are people listening to this show that are not going to spend a dime out of their retirement money. And they have pensions and Social Security. They're going to let things happen that way, and they're just going to save this money. And they're going to pass it on to their kids and grandkids or whoever. And if that's you, then a different type of plan is appropriate. And so that's why when we are talking the first time, I'm going to ask you a lot of questions about what's important to you. Not what do I think the best thing is, not how do I feel about money, but how do you feel about your money? Where do you want it to go and when and how much? And that will dictate a lot of the plan. And so if you're not planning to spend your retirement money, your plan is going to look very different from somebody who is trying to squeeze every dime out of their retirement portfolio as they can. And there's no right or wrong answer to that. It's simply a difference of opinion. But we have to understand that going in on the front end to make sure that we are giving appropriate advice and getting you to where you want to go.
So those are the go-go years, Jake. Let's talk about the slow-go years. What if someone wants to be more conservative early and spend more later?
Yeah, I would say that's definitely something we can do. I would caution against that from a philosophical standpoint, just because I've seen so many people that save and save and save and save, and then something happens to their health, and then they can't do any of the things they want to do. Nobody's guaranteed tomorrow, so I would say that I would encourage people to live their lives while they're here and not assume that you're going to be great at 80 and then start traveling. But if that is important to you, that is something we can do. We can save a little bit more early, and we can spend the Roth money in later years. We can kind of take our time, and you will definitely have more money at the end, but you also are going to be sacrificing earlier on. So we have to kind of decide whether that's really what you want. I would say I have people that fit into two categories mainly. Either they want their income to remain steady all the way throughout retirement and maybe adjust a little bit for inflation. Or I have people that want to spend most, if not all, their money early on while they know their health is good and then rely on pensions and Social Security later in life. Or maybe we spend half the money early on and then we rely on the other half in a lower income bracket after the first 10 years or so. Those are the two buckets that most people will fall into, because there's a lot of people that recognize that the next 10 years of your life are going to be the best 10 years of your life health-wise. And you want to be able to do the things that you want to do. And whether that's fishing off the bank down here or going ocean fishing or going around the world and going on safari or going to Europe and shopping in Paris, all those things come with a different price tag. And so that's where the planning aspect can come in.
So Jake here at Floyd Financial Group, of course, we're a full-service financial advisor firm, and taxes is one of the big things that we plan for. How important is tax planning, and can it really make a difference in someone's retirement?
It absolutely can make a big difference in retirement. And as we've talked about before, there's a lot of cases where I don't think a Roth conversion is appropriate. But if you're wanting to pass a significant amount of money to your beneficiaries and your beneficiaries make considerably more money than you do, then that can be a reason to pay the taxes at your tax rate, convert it to Roth, and then they can inherit it with no taxes. A lot of people have heard the saying, a penny saved is a penny earned. And I think a penny saved in taxes is more than a penny earned, personally. And I know if Randy was sitting here, he would say it's more than $1 earned because he really hates taxes.
Yeah.
And I do have people that are just kind of vengeful about, they're like, hey, I don't want to pay a dime of taxes more than I have to.
Sure.
And if it costs me something, then that's okay. But there's a principle matter to it. But ultimately, any dollar or any penny that we don't spend in taxes is more money in your pockets, more money growing for you, which equals more income and more legacy later. So really minimizing the taxes is what we want to do.
Well, Jake, I think most retirees don't realize this, but the IRS can become your biggest expense in retirement. And it's not because of how much you've saved, it's because of how much and how you take it out. If you're pulling money from the wrong accounts, the wrong order, you could be paying thousands more in taxes every single year. Here at Floyd Financial Group, we build a tax-smart withdrawal strategy designed to keep more of your money in your pocket. This is a no-cost, no-obligation retirement review. So call 417-889-7233. It's 417-889-7233 and request your Floyd Financial Group retirement review. No cost, no obligation, and no judgment. 417-889-7233. Jake, let's take a break. When we come back here on our fine radio program, we're going to be talking about the best places to retire here in the Ozarks when our program continues here on 104.1 FM KSGF, where Springfield comes to talk.
People of the Ozarks, step away from the fishing pole and prepare to be shown the money, because we're back with more straight talk and honest answers with Jake Floyd and Jeff Shea.
Welcome back to Show Me the Money. I'm Jake Floyd, and in this segment, we're going to be talking about the best places to retire in the Ozarks.
And Jake, everybody talks about retiring to Florida or Arizona, someplace like that. But right here in the Ozarks, we got some of the best retirement destinations in the country. We've got beautiful lakes, lower cost, and strong communities. So, Jake, why are more retirees looking around and saying things are pretty good here in the Ozarks instead of the traditional retirement hotspots?
Yeah, I think there's two main reasons that people choose the Ozarks to retire in, whether they live here or whether they move here. I think number one, if we're going to be honest, I think number one is cost of living. The cost to live here is lower than 98% of the rest of the country. And if you live in California and you sell your 1950s shack that's leaning over to the left, you can take your $2 million
right.
and buy a nice estate out here with property and still have some left over to spend. And I have quite a few people that have done that. So I think number one is cost of living. But number two is people are tired of the insanity on the coasts of the political agendas, the madness, the homelessness, everybody getting away with crime, the soft on crime policies, the taking away people's guns or ability to defend themselves. People are just sick of it. And they're like, the weather's nice in Southern California, but I just can't take it anymore. And so I think there's a lot of people moving here for those two reasons mainly.
But if you're already here, you look around and you're right. You need to look at some of these other environments and you realize that things are pretty good here in the Ozarks. I've had the chance to live on both coasts, and you're exactly spot on about what's going on out there. $2 million is basically just a tear-down house. That is absolutely ridiculous. But here in the Ozarks, affordability wins. I mean, we've got lifestyle without breaking the bank, less congestion than coastal retirement areas, strong sense of community, and four seasons. But I don't know, it's debatable about the manageable winters sometimes. You still get fall colors in spring without the brutal northern winters that they would get up there in places like Minnesota. So let's get specific here. Where are the best places to retire in the Ozarks right now?
Shout out to the lake people out there. You know, I think if you like this area, you've been here a long time, and if you like the lake, it's hard to not consider Kimberling City, Branson area with Table Rock Lake. I think there's a lot of people that if they had their druthers, as we say around here, They would love to have a house near or on the lake to retire on. They can sit on their boat, fish, or visit with people. There's a lot of people that really love the lake. Now, I am personally not one of them, to be honest with you. I've never quite understood the wanting to bake on the boat, but I'm sure I do lots of things that people don't understand too. And so I think that everybody has what's important to them, but I'd say lake life, whether it's Branson, Kimberling City, or even, let's say, Stockton Lake. Stockton Lake is a beautiful lake in this area and has a lot less traffic on it even during the season. It's a little bit more out of the way, but Stockton's a great lake too. So we have a lot of really nice, really clear water lakes here. A lot of the things that make it difficult about this area, all the rocks and lack of dirt, make for really clean, clear water of lakes and streams and rivers.
When I think about places here in the Ozarks, I think about Branson. Now, I haven't been down there a lot, but it is the entertainment capital of the Ozarks. I mean, you can go down there still, and what is it, Yatsok Smirnoff or whatever his name is? He's still doing a show down there somewhere?
Oh, yeah. Yakov Smirnoff.
There
so I know
is.
it's Yakov because my given name is Jacob, right? I go by Jake, but Yakov is Russian for Jacob.
Okay.
So that's how I remember that. But Yakov Smirnoff, his show is hilarious. He's a very funny guy and very conservatively natured. I haven't seen his show in a while. The last time I saw it was when Hillary was running against Trump, and he made a ton of jokes at Hillary's expense. And at the end of the show, he raised a big American flag and talked about how grateful he was to be in the United States. And so I don't have a single bad thing to say about Yakov. He seems to be the American dream come true.
And in Branson, there are so many shows. There was the day when you could still see the Newlywed Game. And, I know you're a little young, but as a kid, the Newlywed Game was on TV and was hosted by Bob Eubanks, who, by the way, is still alive. He's 88 years of age. I don't know if he hosts the Newlywed Game in Branson anymore, but that would be interesting. This all sounds great, Jake, but what mistakes do you think that people make when choosing where to retire?
Well, I think, honestly, the two that we mentioned at the top are two places that you should consider is, do you want to retire in a place that has a ridiculous cost of living? And some people are like, well, I'm from Colorado and I've lived here. Now I want to move back to Colorado when I retire. And again, if you've done a good job saving, you might be able to do that. But a lot of people don't have the assets to be able to live in a higher cost of living area. Certainly California, New York, but even Colorado, like Denver, Boulder area is pretty high cost of living. Even Northwest Arkansas now is getting a little bit pricey, especially Centerton, Bella Vista, obviously Bentonville, some parts of Rogers, Northern Rogers, or I guess technically Northwest Rogers, I should say. Those areas are starting to get pretty pricey too. And so we still, if Dad was here, he'd say, we live in the last bastion of sanity here. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. I've chuckled at that over the years, but even though I'm questioning the sanity of this area sometimes, I think it's much better than a lot of other areas.
And Jake, I think when people think about moving, of course, home price is something that is foremost on their mind, but it's not the total cost of living. We still have insurance, utilities, and property taxes, no matter where we live. They underestimate health care needs as well, too. Distance to hospitals sometimes becomes crucial later on in life, and they don't think long term, will this location work at age 80? But another thing that I think people don't realize is that here in the Ozarks, you've grown up here, maybe in Springfield or the surrounding communities, you've got your friends, your family, you've got your church here. It's everything you know. And then you move to someplace like Florida and you look around and you go, wow, I don't necessarily like this that well because my family's back up north. It just doesn't work out that way many times. If people are thinking of retiring to someplace like Florida as opposed to the Ozarks, what do you think that they should do to make sure that they're going to like it?
Well, I think I would wait and see who the next governor is going to be down there because they've had it pretty good with DeSantis.
Right.
And DeSantis is about to term out. But for me, Florida's just too hot. I need the change of season. I can't just be sweaty and hot 100% of my life. I love Florida other than that. I think Florida's a great place. I like the tropical climate in doses. The political environment, the business environment down there is great, but when you're thinking about where you're going to move to, I mean, again, we want to watch the cost of living because you might get over there and be like, hey, the housing isn't too bad, but the cost of everything else can be significantly higher. And I think taking a trip out to where you're thinking, even if you used to live there 30 years ago, Go out there for a week and live out there, get an Airbnb or something, and test the waters a little bit and see if that's what you want to do. But you need to consider the tax rates of anywhere you're going to move. Now, Florida is an example of a friendly one, because I think Florida's arguably maybe one of the least taxed states in the country.
That's right.
Both from a business and a personal standpoint. I'm sure there's probably areas in Tampa and Miami that are pretty high property tax-wise, but short of that, it's a pretty friendly state. Missouri has state tax. Not all states have state tax. Some states have a higher state tax. Illinois, California, New York are some of those. New Jersey has a very high state tax. So you want to make sure you're thinking about all that and how that's going to eat into your monthly income before you move. Any of those types of considerations are important.
So, Jake, here in the Springfield area, costs of living are pretty good here. But in these other places that we've mentioned, like Branson, Lake of the Ozarks, and so forth, I would imagine that they're similar in terms of cost of living.
Yeah, so Branson's pretty tame on the cost of living, unless you're going to live like right inside of Branson. It can be a little expensive, but the way Branson's laid out, you can live 2 miles from Branson and really buy fairly affordable housing and that kind of thing. Branson specifically has a lot of tourist tax, and so you want to keep an eye on that. If you have relatives that are going to come stay at a hotel, they're going to pay, with all the fees and everything, like 13 to 15% to stay in a hotel. Food is like 13%. So that's a little bit of a higher cost of living thing that you don't get as much of in Kimberling City and some of the other surrounding areas. Certainly like Blue Eye and Shell Knob, where you're a little bit further outside of town, but you're going to be immune from some of those problems. And the other thing with Branson that I think a lot of people don't realize is there's really not very many people that actually live in Branson. There's a ton of people that visit Branson, but I think the total population of Branson is like around 20,000. And most of the people that live there work there, right? It's a little bit like the Vegas Strip, where if you're local to the Branson area, unless you work on 76, you probably don't spend a lot of time driving down 76 because you're not a glutton for punishment in 2 hours of traffic. You learn your way around the area to where you can navigate the traffic and that kind of thing. But it is a very nice area. I've lived here in this area most of my life. I've lived in Tornado Alley my entire life, so I lived in Northwest Arkansas for a while, Tulsa for a while, and then this area for probably 60% of my life or so now. So it's a beautiful area. I love the change of season. Just when you're getting the winter doldrums, spring comes along to pull you out of them. And just when you're dying of heat exhaustion, fall comes in and the leaves turn, and then you get to do it all over again. It's hard for me to imagine living somewhere where it doesn't change ever. And there's a lot of places where it doesn't change. Even like California, while it's beautiful and it's nice every day, when it's nice every single day, you don't appreciate the nice days the same way, I wouldn't think. Now, I've never lived out there.
Right.
It's a little bit like you need some cold times to appreciate the warm times and vice versa.
Right. Well, the Ozarks can be an incredible place to retire, but only if your plan supports your lifestyle. So before you move, make sure your money is ready to move with you. If you're thinking about retiring anywhere in the Ozarks, don't guess. Get a retirement review that shows you exactly where you stand. You can call us here at Floyd Financial Group at 417-889-7233. It's 417-889-7233. It is a free, no obligation retirement review, but it could be the difference between a stress-free retirement and running out of money when it matters most. No cost, no obligation, no judgment. Again, it's 417-889-7233. Well, Jake, we're out of time for this week. I want to thank you for your time, but most importantly, I want to thank the greatest listeners in the world, ours right here in the Ozarks, for joining us. So for Jake Floyd, I'm Jeff Shade, wishing you a great weekend. Be sure to join us again next week right here with another edition of Show Me the Money on 104.1 FM KSGF, where Springfield comes to talk.
The information provided in the preceding program is for educational purposes only and is not intended as investment advice for any individual or entity. All information contained herein is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representations as to its completeness or accuracy. The opinions expressed are subject to change without notice and do not constitute financial, legal, or tax advice. Please consult your financial professional before executing any financial strategy. Financial planning is offered through Floyd Financial Group, LLC, an SEC registered investment advisor.